refresher of LD40, what's next for us. And then we're going to have 3 further working group discussions, probably a bit shorter this morning, but one on the livestock facts advocacy, which Karen's going to lead, one on communications, which Vanessa will lead, and then consolidating on the future for LD40, which Kara will lead. And then Andy's going to, we've consolidated some of the next step slides from each of the working groups. So we're just going to have a refresher on that and make sure that we're all kind of signed up to the next steps. What we want to avoid is this simply being talk, but we need some action as well. And then we're going to close off, have an after action review, lunch, and then various other side meetings and transport to the airport. So that's the plan. All okay with that? Have we missed anything? Did anyone have any overnight thoughts in the piano bar last night? No. Tim, do you have any overnight thoughts? Any overnight thoughts? Desmond Morris meets Salvador Dali. Aha, yeah, the sculptures, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's get going on the working group feedback. So who's going to go first? I think we have Andrew on the livestock modeling. Is that a good one, Antonio? Aha, yes, okay. Do you want to take the mic a minute?
So yeah, who hasn't checked out? Okay, so checkout's 12. Yeah, so maybe at coffee, is that okay? Yeah.
Okay, so check out by 12. Any other domestic announcements before we... Everyone happy with their transport arrangements, that kind of thing? Okay, so we had 3 working groups. We had one on modeling, which Andrew is going to present. Then there was one on standards, I think, which Alex is going to feedback on, and one on quality, which Louise is going to feedback on. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alan. So I've just got 2 slides here. I'll quickly go through. So what challenge is the working group addressing? It's largely around some livestock standard data that feeds into model, getting some processes there for standardisation, and but it's not, and it's about coordination and collaboration for harmonisation of ideas, not homogenisation of the models. We're not trying to end up with one super single model here, and that I think was reinforced at a workshop held in Rome in May. And the focus is on global models. So you're bringing that information to answer questions at that broader scale. The current status was that this kicked off with a working group discussion in Novasha in February, and from that there was a bit of a concept note, initial concept note developed that fed into a meeting in Rome in May, and this was covered off a little bit on the first day, I think, of this meeting. The feedback from that meeting was that the approach needs to be more inclusive and allow for plurality of approaches and models, and that reiterates that point around the harmonisation ideas, not homogenisation. Is it fair to say, Tim, it's been in a little bit of abeyance since then, and this meeting here is kick-starting the process again. So that's the current state of play. Some of the issues that need addressing, this took up most of the discussion, and we re-energised by sitting next to the bamboo bar, next to the pond there, while we're having this discussion without a drink. So we were timed. It also helped us with timing because we wanted to get to a drink, I think. Standardising the key inputs and data sets that fit into the models was some of the key issues that we were talking about, particularly around production systems, the herd models and the feed baskets, because there are different approaches to this. But if we can get that happening in a more harmonised way, that'll improve our overall modelling approaches and our outcomes. We need to think through the different approaches and understand them. For example, productivity and glean, we agree, could be improved. The approach used there is that there's advantages and disadvantages to that approach of a top-down milk production driving the feed requirement versus a more process level bottom-up where you have the feed quality and availability driving production. And there's good reasons why both of those approaches are appropriate, but we just need to resolve how we accommodate both of those approaches as we go forward. And it recognises that we need to recognise that these harmonising these approaches will take time and developing trust. Related to that discussion around glean was around its linkages to gaps that FAO uses in its broader modelling around food security and how we link those. And then at the broader economic scale, the use of impact, the impact modelling and the livestock data that goes with that, and continuing discussions and collaboration between CSIRO and IFPRI, where we've got the skills that go across both of those areas. So next steps, a new concept note to be developed by March 31st, 2019, with Tim, Mario, Carl, Keith and Delapo to progress that. Resources to take on this whole initiative. Took up a bit of discussion. We recognise there might need to be a multi-pronged approach, exploring a range of different potential resource sources, whether it be from an Australian context, ACR, Gates, CRP, so that needs to be thought through. And to progress that concept note, there's going to be an opportunity, I think in that last week of February, for a few people to be in Rome around other meetings, so that people can use internal resources for that to progress things. So I think that's where we got to. Was there anything else from Tim?
Yeah, hang on, Tim, I'll give you the mic.
Thanks. Yeah, no, just that that last bullet there, I would include ILRI as along with CSIRO and IFPRI on the impact modelling.
Yeah, sorry. It's an oversight there because, well, through the Lapo. Mario, did you have a comment? No, you didn't.
Jonathan?
It looks, from what you presented, that you're going to focus very heavily on grazing-based systems. It's not. So is there going to be a component around that sort of switch between feed or food going into pig, poultry, dairy systems, which is kind of an area that's quite tricky, and
yeah,
I don't think it's very well accounted for in a lot of the models that we're looking at.
Yeah. Do you want to answer?
I mean, we cover the whole livestock sector, so transitions from monogastrics to ruminants or vice versa will be accommodated within this. We have quite different, the approaches are quite different from the monogastrics and the ruminants, but it's all included in that.
Yeah, sorry if that you know, I was just using that dot point on different approaches to modelling there to highlight just that there are different approaches and we need to, you know, they need to work through those, and that was a specific one to ruminants rather than marginalising the other, meant to marginalise the other monogastrics.
Hannah?
Thanks, Andrew. Could you say a little bit more about the work that's going to be done around standardizing key inputs and data sets? Like, what is meant by standardizing those key inputs and data sets?
Well, and we heard some of this yesterday, the crop modelers, for example, have been very good at standardising some of this. So I think it is, and independent of the models that you're using, if you can get some standardised data sets with attributes, whether it be for feed baskets, the right nutrients that they're consistent and the way that they're put into the models. Maybe others from the working group want to comment on that.
Mario?
Yeah, for example, what we would like to do is try to standardize some of the input parameters so that then comparisons are a lot easier. So for example, this means making sure that if we're working, say, in India, that we're using the same body weights to characterize our animals. Ideally, if we can actually think of relatively similar feed baskets or mortalities that go into the herd models and things like that. At least to have more, even though the methods for modeling might be different, at least we have certainty in the input parameters. So there's one less thing to compare. Units and so on.
Yeah. So that's one around the what's a livestock unit, and Jonathan raised this yesterday. So while there are approaches to making livestock units equivalent, there's a wide diversity in those approaches. So trying to get some consistency in those is needed.
Okay. I think we move on. So thanks, Andrew, and the modeling team. We'll move on. Yeah, give them a round of applause. We'll go on to Alex and data standards.
Thanks. It's actually quite interesting hearing the modeling team talk about standards, because that came up in our discussion as well, about linking in with particularly the modeling working group. The standards part, actually, it was a very interesting discussion, actually quite a lengthy discussion, but where we ended is that part of what we need to do is still define the challenge. I mean, when we think about standardization, what are we really talking about? What are we standardizing, and why are we standardizing it? I think that was a lot of what our discussion was about. We spoke about linking in with others working in this space. We spoke about linking in with the rest of the LD4D community and other working groups, what they need. So, for example, the modeling group, what is it that they need in terms of standardization, and things like that. We ultimately felt that there is scope for, whether it's a working group or whether it's just somebody really driving this and working with the LD4D community on all of this. We thought there was scope to do that. There seems to be a need for data standardization, although, as I mentioned, I think defining exactly what that means within the context here is maybe one of the challenges that we're faced with. So we think there is scope for somebody to really define the terminology, the interoperability versus standardization. I mean, what is the goal? What do we really want to achieve? And it wasn't that easy for, I think, the couple of us sitting there just to say, well, this is what we want. I think it's a broader LD4D community challenge that we need to undertake. We spoke a little bit, as we heard in the data standards session a little bit earlier, we spoke about capturing the lowest level of data. So almost not trying to slice the data halfway through and then trying to standardize everything, but really collecting data in the right way that allows that standardization to happen. We also spoke a little bit about being a bit more innovative in collecting data. Standardization becomes a lot easier if you collect data in the right way, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to challenge the way that we're collecting data, and see if there is a better way to collect data that helps standardize it. Sorry. We also spoke about a data interoperability guideline that Hannah shared with us that I think we can certainly take into account as we start to build out this concept and this idea. And what we felt, so actually there is it's probably not quite a proposal, it's more of a concept note. There is a concept note. We had a meeting earlier with SEBI and LD4D earlier in the year, just on a few thoughts about how we can potentially look at standardizing data. And the next steps for us is really to start sharing that within at least the group that met yesterday. But I think ultimately some of the broader LD4D community, to see if there is something, if we can put together a team, a working group, or somebody driving this, an organization driving this that can really work with the LD4D community and really standardize data for whatever that might mean. I think that's part of the challenge, is defining that in the first place. So, I mean, I don't know if there are any of the other members that want to add anything.
Yep. Jonathan?
Yeah, one thing we touched on was the disease classification, which we talked a bit about, and the fact that there are different initiatives going on at the moment to actually initiate a standardization of disease classification. I don't know, is Paolo here? Yeah. So OIE are working in this space. It's going to be a component of the GBADS process, but I think we stated that there were a number of individuals that perhaps aren't known to everybody who are working there. So that's kind of important that we understand who they are.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment, Paolo, or no? Anyone else? Anna?
To elaborate a little bit on Jonathan's point in this piece, I think Alex gave a really good overview, but I think the first step for us is a bit of learning. As Jonathan said, to understand who's already working in the space, what ontologies exist, where are the gaps, what data could be standardized, or what are the needs for developing some interoperability guidelines. And so really it's more around defining the challenge and learning before coming up with any sort of really concrete work plan.
Okay, good. Anyone else? If not, thanks, Alex and the standards group. And the last one is data quality, and that's Louise.
Yes, I'm reporting back on the discussion yesterday, and data quality and LSMS were rolled up into one session. It focused very much around people with experience of actually collecting the data on the ground, getting that data into an electronic form. And so we had a big discussion, and it's a very wide topic, so it was quite challenging. So lots of people had different views depending on where they worked. I mean, the first thing really that came up was, who are the decision makers? Why are you collecting the data? Why are they going to use the data? What for? One of the ideas was to try and really narrow it down and focus on perhaps a specific metric to actually really drill into it. And so we were thinking about what are the other working groups, have they come up with particular metrics that we could look at? And then think about best practice on this. So even just something as an example of collecting milk production data, we thought of that and so finding whether it has to be top quality or low quality, and if it's got to be top quality, maybe there's a whole tier of other information that you need to support it, and perhaps even guidelines on that, digging into the complexities. And I think this idea that this becomes complex very quickly. One thing that was quite interesting was this idea of benchmark of quality, which is what Mark spoke about yesterday on ROMIS, and actually understanding even that when you have your data, to give guidelines on confidence in the data. And then there was a point back to, if you want to get good quality data, you can't just keep taking the data from the farmer. You need to give back, understand what's in it for them. They think someone else is making money out of it. So how can you address that? How can you make sure that that data goes back to the farmer? So there was a lot of discussion, and it was quite challenging to try and think, well, what tangibly could we do? I mean, one thing we'd thought about doing was some sort of handbook, but then you've got a whole load of experts yesterday that know what they're doing, and they're learning as they go along. We were trying to work out if we could actually capture lessons learned, but even then, sometimes the view was it could be very, very context specific. One thing that did come up is, though, that this is a livestock community, but then people are collecting panel surveys, socioeconomic surveys, and so there are people that maybe don't know so much about livestock, so there could at least be value in highlighting terminology, things to watch out for. That's one area potentially we could look at. Yesterday, there were some interesting talks, and there was a discussion around electronic or paper forms, and even that, sometimes it's based on experience, what's going to be most appropriate for the situation. So I think as regards the working group, this might evolve later, but I do wonder if it's better at the moment that there's some sort of coordination between certain individuals, and if people are interested, they can email us. But otherwise, we might try and work with a few people. So, for example, we are the COP for the big data platform for livestock. There's a working group on socioeconomic data, so I'm thinking it's probably worth us getting involved with that. But then also staying in touch with Harriet and the LSMS team, and just thinking about some of the data that's collected there around livestock, but then staying in touch with grantees that collect that type of data and seeing if there's some sort of coordination role and see how that goes. So I think that was it. So, I mean, if people are interested who were in that session yesterday to have a working group, we can definitely form one, but I'm not sure, it's a bit challenging to work out what concrete, tangible tasks we could deliver at the moment. So.
Okay, good. Thanks, Louise. Any comments from that group? Reactions? No? If not, let's give them a round of applause. Oh no, Andrew has a minor point from Andrew.
Yes, you put up an example of milk production. In fact, Guy and I were just discussing before we started, just being clear around some of those metrics. Yeah, because milk production per year versus milk production per lactation. Yeah.
I think that was the message in the meeting. To even just picking one metric would be quite a bit of work. That the whole, it's, you know, all that information around it really.
Is that something that the community would find useful? I mean, there's no point in us going away and doing a lot of research and pulling information together on milk production or egg production, whatever it is, unless this community would use it. So some sort of gold, silver, bronze way of collecting information on that and trying to, is that something that would be useful?
Meredith?
The short answer is yes, but I do think, you know, we talked a little bit about a few potential ones that we might want to focus on. One being gold, silver, bronze of collecting how many cows are in a herd to start out with. And then, so if we could pick just a few of the sort of big ticket items, and this sort of goes hand in hand with some of the other data standardization groups that I think are getting at some of the similar information of like, what is the data that we need? Okay, well, if that's the data that we need, how are we going to collect it? What is the gold, silver, bronze, depending on how much, how like quality that data that you need for the decision that you're making?
Okay. Let's give that group a proper round of applause now. Okay, good. So that's, we have one more set of working groups after coffee, but now we move on to the session on communicating livestock facts in a fake news era. Is that right? Something like that? And I'm going to hand over to Vanessa, who's going to lead this session.